And I see right here the great struggle in our churches today between being glory of God focused, Christ honoring and Bible saturated, are being man-centered, pragmatic, and numbers idolatrous and success oriented. Notice what it says in verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised on the third day. So Jesus says, all right, you guys are with me. Peter's been the spokesman. You're going to go with me. You want to build this assembly of true believers. And then Jesus in verse 21 says, and by the way, here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be delivered up. I'm going to suffer. And I'm going to die. And then I'm going to rise again. That doesn't look like a very culturally relevant way to build your following. That does not look like a very sophisticated, clever approach to keeping your crowd. And so Peter, still somewhat shallow, just like Jeff Noblit is sometimes very shallow, and perhaps yourself, thinking as a human, discerning with human discernment, begins to pull Jesus aside. The text says it very plainly. And he says, God forbid it, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Well, perhaps we ought to be benevolent about Peter. After all, we all find ourselves there sometimes. But in this case, this was so fundamental and essential. The Lord looks at Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. Right now, Peter, you're thinking under the influence of demonic forces and man's ideas and not the will of God the Father. You want to be about my work and about building my church, but you want to do it your way, in your understanding, with your ability, and by your power. And that's the satanic lie that entered Peter on this day and that is entering our churches at this very hour. Oh, they say things are so changed. The culture's different and people are different and society's different. And we've got to do various and sundry different things. That's exactly where Peter was. The outward veneer's a little bit different, but the core principle is the exact same thing. Peter wants to build the church. Enthusiastically, he wants to build the church, but he wanted to do it his way instead of humbly submitting to God's way. Can I say something to you? If you can explain the growth of your church, it's not of God. There must be the mark of God's life and God's power and God's blessing, converting souls and drawing men and women to truth that the world would scoff at and say is irrelevant and say is outdated. One of the great problems in our churches is not the purpose-driven movement and not the seeker-friendly thing. The problem is the old, hollow, empty, lifeless, powerless orthodoxy. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am very committed to orthodox doctrine. But it must be infused with the life of God. And some of you, the best thing you can do for your church is go get on your face and seek God with brokenness and tears until the life of God infuses power in the great doctrines of the faith. We don't need to change doctrines. We just need power and life and God in the midst of our churches. Too often we find ourselves exactly where Peter is, though. Instead of thoroughly following God's plan for God's church, we come up with our own ideas. And you know what the result is? God removes His hand of power and blessing, so we have to resort to all types of Madison Avenue, Steven Spielberg type of gimmicks and idolatries to where our churches become Six Flags over Jesus. Because God's not doing anything, so we have to manufacture something to make it look like something's going on. And it's a blasphemous sin in the eyes of God that these things are going on. The editor of a large American newspaper said this not too long ago. Just when we need the church the most, It has become just like us. We simply do not need psychology to help us build Christ's church. We do not need psychology or psychiatry to build His church. We do not need sociology to build His church. You don't even need to study community demographics to build His church. What we need to do is submit ourselves to become diligent, humble, Spirit-led students of the Word of God and work out from the Word of God a sound biblical guideline for what His church is, how it's supposed to function, and how His power works in it, and commit ourselves to that, and pray, and seek, and preach, and teach, and die if God doesn't move right there. Because, brothers and sisters, if God does not build His church with the truth, He's certainly not going to build it on a lie.